Once again, more dramatic, compelling, riveting testimony. We've seen that throughout this trial so far, throughout the testimony all week long. Let's bring in our expert, Candace Kelley, to help us break everything that we've seen down so far. We heard from his girlfriend, who once again did a great job, I believe, of humanizing him. We heard from his supervisor. But I want to start off with the paramedics and what they were able to prove for the prosecution.
You know, the paramedics were able to prove that as soon as they got on the scene, they were able to see that George Floyd was dead, or he flatlined. As one person put it, I'm going to put this in simple terms, I thought he was dead. And so this really leads to a positive side for the prosecution, in that if they knew he was dead with just upon arrival and looking at him, why didn't Chauvin know he was dead? Or did he know he was dead, yet in spite of that still kept a knee to the neck? And that's a prosecution's point that I think they made very well by extracting that from these two people who worked with the paramedics on the scene.
Candace, we learned that George Floyd was hospitalized for an overdose. That was about 2 months prior to his death. The defense wants to use that information. Explain how they're doing it.
Well, overall, this really was a day of winning for the prosecution, but moving the needle a little bit was this admission of this March 2020 admission to the hospital that we are now entering into the floor for discussion. So the defense has building their case by saying, not only do we have this incident where he went to the hospital in March of 2020, but we have the May 2019 incident where he also went to the hospital. So these are two incidents where he went to the hospital. Overdose, was probably close to death, perhaps. This is the defense strategy that they're trying to make, that this was a man that has been close to death before, and that this is part of his MO, that he was a drug addict, and this is part of the causation that made him die, and not necessarily only the knee to the neck, or perhaps just only on its own, it was the drugs that caused his death.
The prosecution is banking that people are seeing drug abuse differently than they have in years past. The research shows that more than 10 million opioid abusers in 2019, and there is a war against opioid use and abuse in this country right now. So hopefully that shows when it comes to how they look at George Floyd. But I look at what his girlfriend did on the stand yesterday, and to me, if I remember, it's the first time somebody actually talked about him being alive and what his character was like and what kind of person he was. How would you grade his girlfriend, Courtney Ross, as far as how she humanized George Floyd on the stand yesterday?
But listen, we not only just have a star witness, once again, we have another superstar witness. She was an A+. She was superb in humanizing this idea of people being on drugs, and as you said, this opioid crisis. Certainly, I'm sure that every single person on that jury could identify knowing someone that's been on drugs, whether it's been opioids or something else. So she was someone that brought to light that he was a human being that was going through struggles. But she also told a love story. She also spoke of a man who had characteristics that were very admirable, asking her, can we pray together, when he saw her in stress. So she was an amazing prosecutorial witness that I think that these jurors will never forget. From what I understand, there were just lots of notes being taken in the courtroom in terms of what she said, because she did bring a human element about George Floyd that we hadn't seen before, and also putting a different face on the opioid crisis and drug crisis, and that this isn't something that just belongs to Black people. She is a white woman talking about how they both went through this struggle together. And I think that made a difference too, in terms of characterizing George Floyd and looking at him as a Black man in America.
Candace, after George Floyd is taken to the hospital, we got to hear that conversation. You hear Chauvin, the defendant, talking to his shift supervisor, or the sergeant, I think it was. He leaves out the one detail that brings us to today, and I want to know how you think that's going to play. No mention of a knee on a neck.
Yeah, no mention of a knee on the neck. This could either be an omission because he thought that it wasn't worth mentioning, or this could be an omission on the prosecutorial side that he knew it was wrong and made sure he did not mention it. But you would think that being on somebody's neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, which is the whole crux of what happened and when the death occurred, that he would mention that to his supervisor. He did not, and I think that this is key evidence that will play more to the side of the prosecution. How could you forget that fact of 3 men holding a man who wasn't resisting at all on the ground? This is something that is going to be looked at as a flat-out lie, and it's going to work for the prosecution in amazing ways, I think.
Yeah, and remember all those people desperately pleading with him to get the knee off Mr. Floyd's neck. Candace